Hello and welcome to our 32nd Help Save Our World online speakers meeting. I'm Dennis, the teacher of this awakening thought journey back to healthy, happy you and to an abundant, sustainable living earth. The topic for the next hour will be part 4 of the pillars of thought on which our civilizations stand. Let's begin with introductions. Please introduce yourself, Kurt.
Hello, Kurt. I'm living in South Florida, and my life from many years ago and probably until I die is really about being a contribution to the world. That's supported me up until this point.
Lorna, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Lorna. I am also in South Florida, originally from Guatemala, and I'm a humanistic advocate, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Sarah?
Good morning. I'm in the Northeast and a big fan of what you're discussing and completely and always human existence and coexistence, the earth and so forth. And I'm excited to be part of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's wonderful. So let's begin with the concept of bubble people. Many years ago, as a child in apartheid South Africa, I remember window shopping at about 10 o'clock at night in the middle of downtown Durban. There were only whites milling around the streets, enjoying paradise. There were no blacks in sight, no cleaners, nor security guards, just the odd police van passing by. We were the bubble people living in Wonderland. This happened while the horrors of herding black people into homelands was being enforced. This herding resulted in too many people living in relatively small areas of land, which resulted in total devastation of those areas, soil erosion, deforestation. Then the black people were said to be stupid because they destroyed their own land. While most of their ancestral land had been stolen from them by those in power, the South African military, and driving them into these homelands. And that land was then sold to the white farmers. And they then farmed that land to produce whatever was required in the idyllic society in which we lived. I was raised in a country that even considered Englishmen to be second-class whites. We were rebuked as Engelsman in Soutbeel in the Afrikaner-ruled apartheid South Africa. Within that societal structure, whites were perceived to be superior to Indians, who were perceived to be superior to blacks, who were perceived to be superior to colored people. The societal pyramid scheme or power-based system was divided by the color of your skin. Apartheid is the Afrikaans word for segregation, separateness, which they took to the extreme. The Afrikaners and the Christian whites and everyone else of that tree of religions were indoctrinated to believe the irrational belief that they were superior. They were the chosen ones, chosen by God. So superior and more intelligent and more evolved, they were chosen to rule over others. These principles that were taken to this extreme stemmed from an extremely religious belief coming from the Nederduits Gereformeerde Kerk, which is the post-Dutch Reformed Church. The racial slur, kafir, or kafir, as they would say in Afrikaans, meant non-believer in their Afrikaners' God and religion. And of course, no black people were allowed to in their churches, nor were they allowed to get the same education as whites. So they, of course, were not educated into the white system, so therefore perceived as inferior. Just to clarify, I'm not saying that all Afrikaans people are all the same and felt the same way. Many were educated and thinkers who didn't agree with the government nor apartheid, just like most or many English-speaking people were. I opposed the system from the moment I became aware of what was going on. So, of course, I had a tough life at school because I wouldn't accept or subscribe to the rules and the indoctrination they were imposing upon us. During my final year at school, I had nowhere to live. So my brother, who had become a policeman 2 years earlier to help feed his family because of an economic collapse in South Africa, took me in. He snuck me into the police barracks at night and took me out on patrol at night until it was time to sneak me in. One night, he stopped a black man who was walking along the road after curfew without a dumpas. A dumpas is a passbook that allowed him to live and work in a white area. But of course, he had to be in before curfew. So my kind-hearted brother, Pat, took him in the van and took him to jail for the night, basically to protect him, with the intent of releasing him first thing in the morning. Unfortunately, they had a change of watch, and that morning I walked through the charge office, and the man, I saw him folded over on a bench in an absolutely bloody mess. He had been beaten close to death and subjected to all sorts of torture, including electric shock to his testicles. Distraught, I turned to my brother and asked, "Why?" Ashamed, he said, "I cannot control the other police officers who came on duty after me." As an immigrant and now an American citizen, I've witnessed similar trends happening where I lived in Fort Lauderdale and all over America. The first thing that shocked me when I arrived in America was the use of extreme absolutist language, good and evil, black and white. I was terrified of the institutionalized xenophobia, people being called illegal aliens, seeing and experiencing the abuses of foreigners. Actually, people very close to me, like one of the guys who sailed over with me, was put into a immigration prison and sent back to South Africa. So seeing the experiences and abuses of foreigners, which were forged into law and enforced by immigration policing, walls, borders, border patrols, immigration jails, deportation, separation of children from their parents. Then the political divisiveness of the dualistic political system, driving division between different ethnic groups, racial groups, or religious groups. When I say dualistic, I mean the Democrats and the Republicans. There's no variety or very little power in any of the other possible groups. So it's become very much a dualistic system. The clarity of the divisive pillars of thought of the pyramids of power were taken to another level. And in many cases, way beyond what we experienced in apartheid South Africa, where people of color are beaten and murdered, not in a civil war, but just in everyday life by police that are more and more militarized as time goes on. Then I've seen it happen on many videos over the years, which I've shared and spread awareness of their plight. This systemic violence has been perpetuated against the Native American Indians throughout the history of America, as well as against Black people and Hispanics. The color of your skin driving racial profiling and the extreme abuses of power. The economic war against others was to me so clear on every turn, watching how Black people were being herded into ghettos through gentrification and many other economic systems, depriving them of land and so on throughout history. It was horrifying to see a country composed of so many people from all over the world that it could be so divided for the centralization of wealth and power, no matter what the cost to the people living in the country and, of course, around the world. In this case, I use a commonly used American label, Black people, to show the absolutist language commonly used in racist America, as it was used in apartheid South Africa. To clarify, absolutism is a pillar of thought on which the pyramid schemes stand. It has led to absolutist labeling, which is one of the biggest dehumanizing problems in our fear and hate-based societies. If we change those fundamental pillars, we change our world. I've never met white people nor Black people in my life. Have you? Has anybody?
Say it again?
Yeah, you can answer that question if you think it's true that you've met Black and white people or you've met them. Anybody?
Yes. You mean met white people, say?
No. Have you ever met a Black person or a white person?
Both.
Oh, you think you have. Let me explain to you that that's not the case.
Okay.
All right. Every human being is unique and adapting to changes as processes. Our skin tones vary all over our bodies. And if you look at absolute white, right? White, like the whitest thing you can imagine. No human on this planet is that color. There is no white person. And if you go to the extremes of Black, what Black is, all right, I have yet to see a person that is that color. All right, that is an abstract idea. All right, so our skin tones vary all over our bodies, like hands or the back of your hands, how much sun you've been exposed to, how much ultraviolet light you've been exposed to, your ancestral exposure and the regions they lived in over many generations. You can see people who come from very northern cold climates. They have a much more pink or whiter skin than people who are in maybe in Europe and those regions who have more of like an olive color skin. And then as you come down closer and closer to the equator, you get people with much, much darker general pigmentation. And then as you go further south, then of course it goes the other way. And it depends to what degree and what extent your parental lineage was in those regions. So you have to look at our ancestral lineage as we trace back. And then of course, as we trace back through our genes, we are generally a very complex mixture of many, many different groups of people who interbred and so on throughout many, many generations of human life. And you can go back to Neanderthal man and Homo sapiens, and there's so many different species that are mixed together to come up with what we consider to be who we are now. There is no such thing as gene purity in humans. The list of variables are as many as there are humans. We are all humans and of the greater family of life on this planet. We are related to all life on this planet, going back to the origins of life. So right back to the initial microorganisms that became plant life and animal life, and then various trees and animals and so on, we're all part of that whole composition that developed into becoming humanity. Separateness or specialness or elitism is all nonsense. Segregation is insanity and a major causal factor of why we're harming our family of life just for the sake of wealth and power. I've also been part of many protests throughout my 17 years of coming and going in America, and seen the abuses of power and the abuses of the people's basic human rights and civil rights by government, whether it was local, state, or federal. These are supposed to be our constitutional rights. With all the systems of force and the inequalities in the legal system, you can see how these abuses of power take place and how it's just a very corrupt system. So might, power, is not right. It doesn't, just because it's powerful, doesn't mean that it's right. Now, I'm going back to my youth in South Africa. When I left school, I joined the Merchant Navy to become a marine engineer, to avoid the military, like all other young white males were required to do, compulsory military training. I sailed up and down the Mozambique coast, trading for copra, dried out coconut flesh, where I learned and heard the South African propaganda story about the war between Frelimo and Renamo. Frelimo, I was told, were the communists, and Renamo were the good guys fighting against the communist threat, the terrorists that were trying to invade South Africa. So many years later, sailing as a captain of a 56-foot catamaran, I discovered that Renamo was a South African military and mercenary force that were laying anti-personnel mines across Mozambique. And Frelimo were the people of Mozambique fighting for their lands and their freedom. Although many of the mines have been cleared over the years since then, they are still a problem today, where indigenous people lose their legs and their lives. Back then, when Princess Diane was alive, she was so actively protesting the mining of Mozambique by the South African government. But we were taught that we were the good guys in apartheid South Africa. We patriotic South Africans were fighting against the evil terrorists for God and country. We were sending our young sons to the military to fight the good fight for our people's safety, God and country, not knowing that we were killing, murdering, and plundering other countries for those in power to gain more land, resources, access to ports, control, wealth, and power, or whatever those in power wanted. You see, wars are economic ventures. They spend the money, the tax dollars or tax money, rand in our case, to finance the wars, to make an economic return, gaining energy, resources, drugs, land, whatever it is that they want for the rich. And in the case of oil, this keeps the cost of oil and energy lower within an economy, of course, if you can steal it from somebody else and market it, sell it to your own people. So this is a sweet deal for the rich. They can have as many wars as they want without any real cost to them personally, keeping their people within the pyramid, dependent upon them, and of course, to keep them in business. There's no responsibility and accountability or empathy for them because it's only business. Okay, just one more thing about why I joined the Merchant Navy, and then I'll open it to the floor. Another reason why I joined the Merchant Navy when I finished school was to get an education, which I couldn't afford because I came from a very, very poor family at the time, while avoiding the compulsory military service because I didn't want anything to do with the apartheid killing machine. While in the Merchant Navy, I studied marine engineering and I traveled a lot around South Africa, not just South Africa, and South America, crossing over and going all the way around the South American coastline. The only problem with joining the Merchant Navy was that I had to commit to an 8-year contract because the government required that I serve 8 years in the Merchant Navy to compensate for my 2 years of compulsory military training plus my 2 years of camps, which every other white South African had to do at that time. South African male, of course. However, I left before the 8 years were up, having gained credit for for 1 year of my military service. When I left, I did electrical sales for about a year, and then I found there's a great shortage of technical teachers. So I became a technical teacher while studying part-time to qualify and get my degree as a teacher. Then for years, my second year was deferred because education was considered to be an essential service. But at the age of 27, for political reasons, my headmaster just decided, okay, he's not going to defer my military training. So there was I had said to the inspector of schools that I wanted to change the whole education system. And of course, he came down to meet me and I was like, oh, okay, I better not say anything to this guy. And unfortunately, he was like, okay, that's it, you're gone. And they sent me off to the South African military. So, of course, I was called up for the 1 year. I trained and became a lieutenant in the South African military. So instead of getting upset about the whole thing, I treated it as an opportunity to learn and to experience the truth, the lies, and the indoctrination. At the end of my officer training, I managed to avoid going to fight on the border. Just knowing the system, I was able to work it. And I was eventually sent back home and back to teaching. Interestingly enough, from being an extremely healthy, extreme sportsman before the military, when I returned, I was the most damaged and unhealthy person I've ever been in my life. It's just an interesting factoid there. All right, before I go into the next section, which is you might ask why I'm telling you the story, would anyone like to comment? Sarah?
Thank you for sharing your story, Dennis. I love this part of you I had never heard of before. Thank you for telling us. It's really incredible.
Wow, thanks. Anyone else? Kurt?
Yeah, I just, certainly we can relate to the apartheid and the abuse of power and the pyramid of power as we're seeing right now globally, especially protesting and rioting throughout the U.S. and throughout the world. So it's a conversation I think all of us have experienced in our life, and we still get to move to change it because it is what's keeping civilization from accessing its highest potential because the greed of the power just puts a cover and a shield and a wall, to use the metaphor, over all of the good aspects of our hearts and our minds, and just has us in fear and protection and survival mode. I think it's a good setup for what I'm guessing will come next.
Yeah, I think, like you say, you have to really experience the bowels of the earth to be able to rise to as high as you can. So I hope we get there. And of course, I know we're going to get there. Lorna?
I appreciate you sharing this story. I knew part of it already, but I can identify myself with a lot of your experiences as an immigrant and other reasons too. And what did I did with that? I'm grateful, because if I wouldn't go through all that, I wouldn't be as open-minded and loving. I always have been, but more open-minded than when I came to the States. It was hard, but it depends how we use it, right? I, of course, took a long time to really understand and work in my favor and pass it on to the people that, like me, had a different view on how different cultures, and especially the color of the skin, represented here other than my country. So, yes, that's it for now.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. Most people living within a protected system actually don't have the awareness that people who came from out the system do. And that's a critical reason why it's important for these stories to be told by, outsiders, by foreigners, by us. And of course, the great thing is when I was driving my Uber car around, I found the people who could relate to me the most were foreigners. Although there were a lot of amazing people who were open-minded enough to listen to me, which was absolutely incredible. Let me tell you why I tell you these stories. I do so to let you know that I speak from experience. Experiencing the extreme indoctrination, forced acceptance, expected blind belief, fear, hate, absolutism, elitism, segregation of the apartheid system. But I go on to look at it in context with my American experience. The really difficult thing to accept and to deal with is the system did have an effect on me. Now, most people will say, I'm open-minded and I don't dislike Black people and all this, and I'm a perfectly non-racist or whatever. I sometimes find myself having to deal with like my irrational fears of somebody with a darker skin walking down the street towards me, or saying something that I'm horrified that I said it, and then having to apologize. Then realizing that even I, who was opposed to the hate-based systems, was to some extent also affected by it. But only my awareness and being conscious in the moment empowers me to choose in the moment and to correct my thought programming. To get these thought tools, I have spent my life constantly questioning, finding the truth, gaining awareness and consciousness of myself and others. As part of this process, I was gaining the life's wisdom by uncovering the natural wisdom of life and nature. All of this driven by my desire to become a better human being. My learned state of being made it possible for me to be constantly vigilant of the institutionalized choices which were being made for me, then, of course, oppose them on every turn, saying no to wars, no to oppression and abuses of power, and saying yes to love, yes to kindness and compassion and consideration and sharing and caring. Because when we belong to a group, we carry the responsibility for the actions of every single person in that group. If one person in the group kills someone in another group, it is seen as our whole group condoning that action. If the American military goes to war, we are all responsible for what happened in that foreign country. No matter how we justify or make excuses, if we don't say no to war and start to teach our children that it's the worst decision they can make, then we are responsible. Me being more aware than most, I still have to be vigilant of my unconscious conditioning, domesticated and indoctrinated feelings, emotions, choices, actions, so I can make responsible, conscious, alternative choices, even if those choices come with extra hardship, punishment, and ostracism from my peers or from the institutions of power under which I live. These choices are often very difficult choices to oppose the flow and the direction of the majority of the people in a society who just accept the flow of that institutionalized pyramid scheme. I have had to be the critical observer of myself, to feel, know, and see what is happening inside me, so I can think and make better choices and practice them until I am them. I also tell these stories to let you know what it is to be an entitled bubble person and what it is to be unknowingly indoctrinated and to just believe those in authority and power. Then to know what it is to step up and take responsibility for your life, become accountable for your choices and actions. So you know what strength of character it takes to face up to what is going on. And the importance of questioning everything, doing the research and finding out the truth, then being part of the healing, changing processes before it is too late. Racism is unacceptable in any way, shape, or form. If you, your family, and people were the ones who are suffering under the system, would you just accept it and die? All right, so I now go on to a section called propaganda. It begins early with your parents, media, religions, then with government-controlled education systems. The use of flags, singing the national anthem, the Lord's Prayer, the authoritarian structure of the schooling system, the class structure of the schooling system. I was punished a lot for refusing to conform. In the morning assemblies, for refusing to sing along, I was put in actually there was like a back room behind the hall, and I was put there with the Mormon children. I was also threatened and slapped and punished for refusing to participate in organized sport. The vice headmaster standing at the gate with a stick and hitting the kids if they didn't partake in sport. So most kids just accepted and went and joined the teams that played rugby or cricket or whatever was going on. I refused and I walked past him saying, if you touch, it is assault. Because my brother being a policeman, I learned very quickly that if anybody actually physically touched a hair on your head, it was assault and you could charge them. So I was lucky enough to know this and therefore able to protect myself where most kids had no idea. So it's really important that your children know what their rights are. When I, a white man, arrived in America, I was petrified of the police, immigration and border control officers. My eyes were like saucers, even though I had a 29-day Seaman's visa. I was terrified of becoming an illegal alien. I only just managed to avoid them by leaving the country on my 27th day. I flew to Nassau and then to Cuba, where I managed to get a 6-month holiday visa. But I was still terrified. So after 6 months, I went on a holiday to Tortola for 10 days and returned. Tortola is on the British Virgin Islands. Then I returned to America. Then returning to the US for 6 months, I was told by the immigration official I could not return again to America without returning to my home country. So I worked really, really hard on foreign flag vessels to make money to leave. Then I returned to South Africa with my American girlfriend at the time. I felt a tremendous relief and lived without immigration stress for 2 years. But Shannon couldn't get a job or work in South Africa because of her immigration status. So we worked together on foreign flagged vessels. She had other issues, which made our lives really, really difficult. So eventually I had no choice but to take her back to a home in America, where I captained on foreign flag vessels, and Shannon set us up with a cheap car and a cheap flat and a service business. Everything was going so well, so we decided at that time to get married. But I never understood why she asked me, "Please take me away from here, my love. Please take me away from here, my love." I was so focused on trying to earn a living and build our lives that I didn't hear her. From the moment of our arrival onwards, she was caught up in a cycle of temporary hope and healing, followed by self-destruction until her death 2.5 years later. If only I had understood and listened, but I didn't know. I tried everything I could, but I did not really truly understand. What I've realized since then is her grandmother was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian, and her grandfather was an Irishman. So she carried the ancestral pain and substance abuses handed down to her mother and handed down to her. The abuses which many Native American Indians live with now, which is passed down through the generations from all of the abuses they were subjected to throughout history. From the moment of her passing, I was alone again. I lived in constant fear while going through that whole terrifying immigration process, until eventually I got my US citizenship. And even then, I was terrified of the police. Seeing the killings in the streets of Black people around downtown Fort Lauderdale, bloody shot up Black people, in one guy like just bullet-ridden, lying dead in his car, another guy hanging out of his car door, riddled with bullets. And there was another one, and I can't quite remember that one, but this was me walking through downtown Fort Lauderdale and watching these things happen. Living through the abuses of people in the streets and protesters. When we were protesting, we were very, very closely connected to the people on the streets and the homeless people every day, going to feed them and everything. And the abuses of policemen's power, just unbelievable, just beating people up for no reason, destroying people's tents and places where they lived, and stealing their basic possessions, which were just like their little things that they could hang on to for life, were just stolen from them by the police. Police men and women ignoring the right to freedom of speech. Having been close friends with people who were imprisoned by the FBI, manufacturing clandestine operations, my friends were thrown in jail for years. The reading and seeing the lies and the manipulation of the truth in the media, most of which was instigated and supported by the government or governments. Then there's the continuous direct assault on our constitutional civil rights and liberties without remorse or consequences, made me realize that they are not worth the paper they are written on. Just a little bit further. Then eventually, with the economic collapse, big money buying up the housing and the increased costs of rents and the cost of living, I had no choice but to decide to live in my car, where I was constantly harassed by police, banging on my window and threatening me and chasing me away. Eventually living on the edge in fear of my life. I had cancer spots growing on my arm which would not heal. No one should have to live under that sort of stress. Then my daughter offered me an opportunity to go back to South Africa and live with her, write my books, and help my grandson. I jumped at the opportunity. Returning home to South Africa, I was able to take a deep breath, listen to the birds, which seemed so few in South Florida. I was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Nature was alive around me. For the first time in 15 years of fear and stress, I was able to live again. The better diet, less stress in South Africa enabled my skin cancer to begin to heal. All right, before I go into the next section, which is, I want to open it to anyone else who would like to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think that's the story of experiencing the worst that life and society can offer. Just reinforces our understanding. And we can either submit to it and say that's what the system is, or we can stand against it and say there's a better world than what we're living in. So I think our lives go through those peaks and valleys, and certainly you living in your car was a valley in many ways. Removing yourself from the system that was already oppressing you. And the offer from your daughter to come and live with them and appreciate family again started to peak up. Let's just stand that the valleys will not be so low for humanity anymore. I think our current trend is to pull us down pretty hard. I'm not declaring that, I'm just feeling the sense of things. Again, it's why we associate with like-minded people, is to remind us that there is a goal beyond, there is a better world than the one we happen to be in, and we just don't have to accept it. We can recreate or create openings to a better society than what we have being imposed on us. As you know, I won't be able to sit for the next section, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. So I'll certainly look at the video recording once it's complete.
Wow, it's 5:14. I had no idea. I wasted so much time. All right, so Sarah?
I haven't prepared anything to say. I've mostly been listening, but I will say that I appreciate the attention that's been come to this topic over the last few weeks. I don't know if it's the coalescing of coming out of a pandemic, why now are we finally talking more about the injustices around us. I've had the opportunity in the last 20 years to forge relationships with people, diverse people, and understand better the perspective of Black Lives Matter and why we need to say those things. I'd say maybe 5 years ago, I didn't know, and I would ask some of the same questions. Well, all lives matter, but I've really learned over the last 5 years that the 400 years of oppression, things that I, as a privileged person, can't even fathom understanding on a daily basis. I've had to talk with people of older generations than myself and try to convey these things. And I may not be the best communicator at that, but I do try. There's no concept of being able, yes, maybe my ancestors, my forefathers suffered in work camps in World War II and so forth, but that ended. And for 400 years, people of different races have been suffering daily, whether it be housing, whether it be jobs, careers, shelter, you name it. And we've been able to sort of pull ourselves up since the Second World War and have privileges, but that's not the case in other cultures and races, so to speak. So I have appreciated everything you've said, Dennis, and your firsthand perspective on it. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. And it's so, so, so important to try and put ourselves in other people's shoes who literally live this every day of their lives. And it was the same for the South Africans, people of color who were subjugated for so long. I mean, slavery and the abuses of colonialization and the whole process of destroying the kind-heartedness of people who would say to their sons, oh, these people are travelers, feed them, to their woman, and then, guide them up through the mountain ranges when they first arrived without any idea of what was to come. So, and then, of course, I lived through the whole transition of power and the necklacing of people and the violence and the abuses by the police. Absolutely extreme violence that you cannot imagine. And I pretty much see that playing out as the people in power become more insecure as their wealth grows and they separate from the people with less wealth, how they are just having, if they wish to maintain that disparity of power, have to be abusive. And the interesting thing is their fundamental point at which they say, okay, now we can go and harm the protesters or the black people in this movement that's against it at the moment, is if you take our property, then that's theft or that's whatever, and therefore we have a right to abuse you. But think about that. The people in power and literally that whole economic system stands on them stealing from everyone else, standing on the shoulders of the poor, abusing them, enslaving them, and so on, right throughout history. So now, do they not get punished for robbing and stealing others? Or is it their right to punish the poor for taking from them? It makes no sense. Lorna?
Hi. I have to say, Dennis, I understand. I think this is a lot. I understand your journey. Can relate, not to everything, but a lot of it. And what it came to mind is let's keep coming from love, not from fear. I cannot stay for this last part, and I'm going to be honest. Since you advanced, it's going to be very intense. I had a very intense week with coronavirus next door and doing the testing for myself. Thank God it was negative, so I don't think I have the juice to go for more intensity.
No. Okay, we'll call it a day. I mean, I understand that this is extreme and it's an extremely intense journey, but
in my case, I need like
a breath.
Self. Thank
recovery
you.
time.
Recovery time.
I understand that fully. For me, this was a journey of a lifetime, and I'm literally just taking it and I'm compressing it, and I'm like, bam, giving it
really,
to you.
Yeah.
And that's
we should all do something like this one time, if we still have something that has to be told for our own sake, to let it out in writing or speaking. I think it's very healthy. Maybe in pieces, like, I don't know, 2 parts, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I've literally broken this up into sections, and of course, so I mean, I didn't realize the time, so the next section's like
I'm
on to next week. Yeah, the thing is the important thing to understand is if we don't have this difficult conversation, and if we don't feel the pain, then our driving force to make a better world will not be the same. So life is these hills and valleys, And when we hit the bottom of the lowest valley, oh my gosh, we're going to climb. And that's the idea is provide a vision of the future, show what's the worst of the worst throughout my own experience, and then actually providing the tools, because within that I was actually showing people how they can, take that negative feeling and then become aware, become more conscious, become more enlightened, and then take yourself and learn and grow to become the future you want to be. But
Yes.
it's by seeing the bad that we can strive for the vision of the future of health and happiness and love and whatever. But this
Gotta
is a
acknowledge that. Yeah.
difficult time, because
Yeah.
the stories at the bottom of the barrel take a bit of time. So it's going to be like maybe 4 or 5 or I don't know, 10 weeks or whatever period of time it is to take those segments and have a look at them and bring them home to us. Because, when you think of South Africa, you think of a place over there and it's not your responsibility. And you can relate, but not relate. But for you, Guatemala, you can totally relate to. All right. And for various people who've lived in these different places in the world, they can relate to it. But the fact that I've been on both sides of the fence, I've lived as a citizen of South Africa and of America, it gives me this unique situation where I can actually tell these stories from both perspectives and see the parallels, so that people in America can understand me. Otherwise, they won't. And I think my thing is to show what it is, and then to bring hope and skills and knowledge and techniques to be able to grow to the future. So this actually emotionally hurts me so much. You cannot imagine. By the end of this meeting, I am emotionally in hell. So yeah, it's
Have a
not
beach
easy.
close by? Learn a beach close by?
Any beach close by? It's about, I don't know, 25 miles away, and things are pretty tough at the moment. So, spending money going to the beach is not an option.
Okay.
So, but I go for walks. I look at the trees. I look at the bumblebees. It's like
Oh,
that.
please.
That's my release. I've lately been taking my camera and taking pictures of all of the different leaves, the different species of plant, and identifying them and seeing which part of the world they came from, or whether they're indigenous species, and teaching my grandson and teaching another kid that's his friend now. And so that's been like an incredible relief for all of us, actually, is going on these long walks. So yeah.
Before I go, I just want to say something. I got in touch with, remember with the project about storytelling with kids?
Yes.
I got in touch with my godchild.
Yes.
He's 9, 10, and he is into nature a lot. The mother is pretty much an explorer of nature. And we're going to meet today with Zoom again to see what we can do with Rowan. But Rowan is he's interested about the herb.
Yes, they have been recording stories, him and Brendan. They've tried it. I think for 2 days this last week they did that. So yes, they've been interested and they've been trying.
How old is the Rowan?
11.
Okay, so they're kind of the same age. Okay. Well, something is cooking.
There you go.
I want to report that. Okay.
All right. Bye, Lorna.
Thank you.
Okay, Sarah?
Yes, I'm going to do exactly what you might do, Dennis. I'm going to go out and just enjoy some of the day.
Great idea. Just get out there and walk, Walking is or run or jog or whatever, but walking is very, very therapeutic. It's a form of like meditation for me.
Walk around the parks and take in all the beautiful foliage and the smells and everything.
Yeah, we're actually entering autumn right now. So, you know, all of the sort of from that region where you live, where all of the leaves go brown and whatever in fall and so on. We're at that stage, so it's very beautiful in certain senses, but we don't tend to have a lot of that. But that is, those trees actually come from America, believe it or not. So it's wonderful to see.
Maybe we can share a couple pictures on the group,
Yeah,
like
great,
your
great
autumn
idea.
and our spring.
I'll
Okay.
start taking pictures. Bye,
All
Sarah.
right.
Take
Bye,
care.
thank you.
So how are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. I'm working hard, trying to understand my new job. Waking up at like 3:30 in the morning, kind of thinking I'm on a Zoom meeting. Really bizarre stuff like this.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I have to be on a meeting, you know. But I think it's kind of like maybe that's normal for a new major transition in life, you know.
That learning curve is pretty extreme, you know, when you change major things in your life. So, but it pretty much levels off after a while.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I do miss Florida for sure, some aspects of it for sure, but I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for what I have. I think sometimes, you know, like looking back it's golden and I'm thinking of the good things which are good, but there's a lot of good here too.
I'm sure wherever you are in the world is, you know, you've got to look for the magic, you know. I walk along and I look at the tips of the uppermost branches of the trees to see that golden yellowy sort of greeny color as of new life and new growth, and that makes me so happy. And of course every cloud has a silver lining. Look up and see the beauty of the sky and the stars and, you know, all of the animal life and insect life. It to me, that's all magical, you know. So
Yeah, I've seen such a short, well, it makes me realize how little life I saw in South Florida. Like I call him my friendly fox. I've seen it at least 3 times. A hummingbird, a ruby-throated hummingbird, all sorts of bumblebees and chipmunks. There's a lot of chipmunks around, but just beautiful birds, you know. And I realized I went 20 years without seeing this, like in DC and South Florida, and now I'm really appreciating it with new eyes. Do you know what I mean?
absolutely. You know, where we are, we've got like the small catchment dam here, and there's so much plant life. We literally are hemmed in with these big trees around us, and there is just a trickling stream running right here in front of us, and there's just so much life. And that's one of the beautiful things about being in Africa is it's a living country. Whereas in South Florida, it was a dead swamp.
Yeah,
Relatively.
like the smell in the air here. I mean, it fills the house, the smell of spring. And I was like, there was never that smell in South Florida because it was so urban, but just the sweetness of all these smells of growing up here, you know, it's all coming. It's very, I think, isn't the sense of smell your most poignant sense for memories or something? Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, like I go outside and I like focus on being conscious of all around me and the sense of smell and the feel of the breeze and the vibrations. There's like I call it the sounds of the forest. There is this hum in the air. It's just like it's there. And if you focus in on it, you can hear it. It's all around you. And, you know, I've traveled around the world, and there's literally only one place on earth that I've come across that I can remember where that sound stopped. There was none of it. So I know it is something I'm hearing, all right? And it is this energy of life, of the flowing, trickling stream, of the breeze, of the animals and the insects, and everything creates this electromagnetic vibration, which is life living, and it's there. But it was only in this place when I was in Peru, when I walked between, sort of through this cutting behind the rocks, that everything went silent. So that magic of that energy around me is the most incredible thing, and I live for that. I go out on a walk and I fall into the tranquility of this sounds of the forest or sounds of the jungle, and the birds are singing, and even the dogs are barking. It's just like everything is happening. It's this magic of life.
I can only
And
imagine how beautiful it must be. It must be really
oh
nice.
my gosh, just like unbelievable. There's so many species of insect and whatever here. I mean, in a lot of the places in America where we have a lot of the big industrial farms and so on, they've killed all that life. So that it's like, yeah, you've lost that.
I understand here the bumblebees are listed as endangered. They only exist in maybe 1 or 2 patches in Massachusetts, and this is definitely an area where they are. So the honeysuckle, which I think are non-native, but they're all over the woods here. They're just all, male, worker, all the different types of bumblebees are circulating, pollinating the honeysuckle and all the bushes. It's really, there's no shortage from what I can see of bumblebees here. And now I look at them, 20 years ago, I was terrified of them. I was like, oh, a bee. Now I'm just, oh, it's beautiful. Oh, an endangered bee, So.
Oh, wow. I'm saying that it's a lot better here than it was in any of the places I went to in North America, but it's still nothing like it used to be. When I was young, the swarms of swallows and flying ants and just swarms of bees migrating, it was like absolutely magnificent. It was just this living organism of just life everywhere. And buck just like walking through the forest where you are, and then baboons and monkeys and everything. But there's literally been this, the farmers have been at war with their competitors, which are all life basically, that is trying to compete for their crops and their yields and their profits. So it's not what it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some places where there are these sort of greater protection and greater possibility of them surviving. But it's not what it used to be. But it's still beautiful.
Well, give my best to Alex and Brendan and your family. I hope to see them again soon.
Oh, will do. Just they weren't able to make it today, but they're usually online with us every time. So yeah, join us more often. We're happy to have you and really appreciate you coming.
Well, thank you for all the work you put into it, Dennis. It really shows, and I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing it with me.
It's a pleasure. All right, Sarah, go well. Have a magical afternoon and week. And if I don't see you through the week, I'll see you through the window.
Sounds good. You're welcome to join anytime, even though it's 2 a.m. at Toastmasters.
Oh, seriously? I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. You're welcome to join anytime. We got a note that at least through August 31st, we should be providing online access for those that are nervous. So we're planning to go indefinitely online for our meetings.
Wonderful.
So you're welcome anytime to join. And if you want to speak, that would be great. We really enjoyed your speech.
Wonderful. So, I love every opportunity to speak and improve my skills and my stories and so on. So, if you send me a link, I would love it. Is it the same link every time?
For now, yes. Yes. I say for now because yesterday I was teaching and I was Zoom bombed.
Oh,
So
wow.
I experienced the Zoom bombing for the first time yesterday, but for our Toastmasters, it seems like we are in a good shape to use the same link.
Wow.
I think we have a full slate of speakers on Tuesday, but if you could give a speech along the lines of your experience today, I think that would just be amazing.
Okay, wow. Thank you. So yeah, just let me know when you have an opportunity or an opening, and
Oh, I would
I'll
love
prepare something.
to help
All right.
inform the community with your experience first. You know, it's an amazing perspective that I think we'd all love to hear.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll be in touch and
Bye.
plan to join again. Thank you.
Enjoy your day. Bye.